Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mark, and I am a co-chair of Elders Climate Action's Education Subcommittee. Tonight is the first in a series of 3 monthly events focused on actionably influencing policy at the local, state, and federal levels of government. Tonight, this event will be about influencing local policy, climate change policy, primarily but not exclusively relating to cities and counties. In December, ECA will pivot to states, and in January to federal policy influence. The goal in each of these presentations is to first hear from and after engage with our panel of presenters, all who have experience influencing local policy. They will share with you some of their own experiences with the goal that their experiences can better inspire and translate into your own actionable experiences. Relating to the agenda, today we have 7 panelists who will each speak for up to 5 minutes. Following all of their individual parts, you, our listeners, will have about 30 minutes of open Q&A with the panel collectively or individually. For the Q&A, please use the Q&A Zoom icon and not the chat box to avoid mixing up chat with the Q&A. In the last 10 minutes, there will be some closing remarks, and we plan to finish no later than 8 Eastern time. I'd next like to briefly introduce each of our speakers in the order that they will speak. First is Jerry Friedman, who is co-chair of Elders Climate Action, past chief administration officer for a Floridian city and a Michigan grandparent. The title of Jerry's talk is City Government Listening to Residents. Second is Francis Stewart, who is co-chair of ECA's Education Committee, a physician and a retired Navy captain living in Bethesda, Maryland. She is the chair for the Montgomery County chapter of Climate Reality and is involved in several other climate action groups, including Climate Exchange and Citizens Climate Lobby. The title of Francis's talk is What Happens After You Declare a Climate Emergency. Third is Michael Peel, who is the statewide sustainability director for Local First Arizona Foundation, providing sustainability program development and other local business and nonprofit support services that focus on sustainability planning and project implementation, grant writing, and research. Michael has lived and worked in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Dublin, and now Tucson, and is currently a doctoral candidate at Arizona State University focusing on equity and sustainability. The title of Michael's talk is Developing Programs for Local Sustainability and Climate Action. Fourth is Myra Jackson, who is a retired electrical engineer and more recently founder of the Global Freshwater Summit, which next occurs in April 2021. Linking local and global policymaking, Myra is also a founding member of the Gaia Field Project for Subtle Activism and a senior advisor with the GeoVerse Foundation, supporting initiatives that include expansion of the civic space. The title of Myra's talk is Activating Civic Spaces for Transformation in a Generation. Fifth is Joe Oren, who is a retired public administration professor from Eastern Michigan University and since has worked with local climate-related nonprofits to secure and implement small grants to help his community address climate change challenges. Joe is the chair of Ann Arbor's Elder Climate Action chapter, and the title of Joe's talk is Strengthening Ann Arbor's Organic Waste / Composting Policy. Sixth is Marilyn Price, who is a member of Elders Climate Action's Northern California chapter. In addition, she is co-chair of Sustainable Mill Valley, a core team member with Green Change, and founder of Freedom Singers, whose mission is to bring songs back to events in support of peace, environmental, political, racial, and social justice issues. Maryland is also on the board for Sustainable Marin and Resilient Neighborhoods. And the title of Maryland's talk is Influencing City and County Government in Marin County. And last but not least is Candice Hollingsworth, who has served as mayor of Hyattsville, Maryland since 2015. Candice has also served as a Hyattsville City Council member and council president. She is a member of Climate Mayors, a bipartisan peer-to-peer network of US mayors working together on climate change. Candice will be leaving her position as mayor at the end of this year to develop a new political party called Our Black Party. So that is our panel. Now I will turn it over to our first presenter, who is Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. My history is that of being the chief administration officer in a city that grew from 34,000 people to over 125,000 people within the space of 10 years. And I know that many people believe that you don't really have any power or real power in your local community. And I'm going to tell you, you have immense power, particularly to influence policy. In general, between 60 and 70% of voters turn out for presidential elections. And in this past election, it was up to 75% in some areas. But that's not true for midterm elections and off-cycle elections. Those numbers are as few as 40% or less actually turn out for a midterm election and less than 20% in local off-cycle elections. In my city, our legislative body was elected in March. Nobody came out for those elections. So when it comes to those elected officials, your vote is incredibly valuable, and therefore they're going to need to listen to you. So how do you do that? Well, first you have to recognize that most of the issues that determine your community and the way of life that you live are decided by local officials. It's your parks, roads, bike paths, recycling, trash, and the way that a community uses its land are all decided at the local level. So there is an opportunity for great influence there. All governments have regularly scheduled meetings, city commission meetings, county commission meetings, etc. And that's where those decisions are made. And those meetings are open to the public. So the first thing you can do is learn when the meetings are, start attending the meetings, which right now is pretty easy because most of them are virtual. So you don't even need to leave your home. In most instances, the agendas for these meetings are posted on the website. Additionally, the public is allowed to speak on particular issues. Some of the things that they vote on are legislative and legal in nature, and they require public hearings. And when there's a public hearing, the public is allowed to speak and comment on those issues. There also, in many places, an opportunity for public participation at certain points in a meeting or at certain times or certain meetings. That policy really varies from state to state, so you need to check locally and see what the policy is, but there is an opportunity for public comment time to speak on anything. It doesn't have to be related to any item that they're discussing, and you have a designated amount of time. So you have an opportunity there. You need to learn everything you can about the policies. Another really positive thing to do, which will take place after COVID, is to start attending the meetings in person. And then when you're comfortable and want to participate in public comment, take somebody with you, have a partner, go to the meeting together and speak together. You can always go up to the podium with two people and one person speak. You need to really follow the actions of your elected officials. Feel free to write to them or call. If they've got staff, staff will call you back. If they don't have staff, likely they will call you back. So that gives you an opportunity to express your concerns, congratulate them on voting for an issue you're concerned about or something that's going on in the town or city or county. In a large jurisdiction, you really want to contact staff to get to your elected officials. So you can search the internet for that information, and Google really is your best friend here. Local officials care about the communities that they are in. Why do they care? Because they want a community that people want to live in, work, and play, because that's how their tax dollars the revenue is produced. So that revenue goes to the community, and then anything that they can do to make that community better helps their reelection, especially when you realize that the numbers for their reelection may be very small. Elected officials really like to be seen participating in their local events in the communities. So after COVID, make it your business to go to local events. Whether it's a ribbon cutting or a health fair, there are a lot of events that local officials like to participate in. They get a sense and the pulse of the community, and it helps them in further making decisions. Also, many of your commissioners or city councils will hold town hall meetings or meet and greets. Generally, in most communities, they are not terribly well attended. You have an opportunity to have the ear of your elected official to have a conversation. And your conversation about climate change and what you want from them that's within the power of the city or town, it's your opportunity to do that. It's important, however, to always be positive and not attack, but express your concerns or ideas, because there's going to be many things that you're going to object to. Many local communities also have advisory boards, and these advisory boards are community members that are appointed to a specific board. And these boards make recommendations to the city council or commission or county council. The advisory boards could be zoning, parks and rec, economic development, transportation. Some communities have sustainability advisory boards. So those are opportunities for you to get further involved in your local community, is to begin engaging in the possibility of being on an advisory board. Also, there's always community groups in your local neighborhood that has similar interests. Join those groups. They'll come with you to meetings, and they'll help with letter writing, etc. So basically, to summarize, important to attend local government meetings, participate where possible, communicate with staff and the elected officials, vote in every election. Obviously, the less people and issues that are on a ballot, the smaller the turnout, the greater your power. So you really can influence local policy. And with that, I will turn it back to Mark, and thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. The next person we have up is Francis. Are you unmuted, Francis?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Wanted to tell you a little bit about what happens in a county like mine after you declare climate emergency. Elders Climate Action has a number of groups working on getting their city or state or county to declare climate emergency. But what happens then? My county, Montgomery County, Maryland, was one of the first jurisdictions in the US to declare climate emergency in December of 2017. Now, if you're not familiar with the county, Montgomery County is one of the most populous counties in Maryland. It borders the District of Columbia and Prince George's County, where one of our other panelists is a mayor. And is one of the most diverse counties with about 100 million people living here. It has an area of 507 square miles with urban, suburban, and rural communities. Now, fortunately, getting ourselves into the position of being one of the first to start declaring climate emergency, we didn't have to start from scratch. In the year 2000, Montgomery County began its work in climate protection as becoming part of the Cities for Climate Protection campaign. In 2008, we set our first greenhouse gas reduction goals. The goals at that point were to reduce emissions by 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. To do that, we were supposed to stop increasing our emissions by 2010. Good idea to stop first, and you're increasing, and then to have a 10% reduction every 5 years through 2050. And they created a sustainability working group and the first climate protection plan in 2009. Also, we weren't working in isolation. We had multiple collaborations. Regionally, we started with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, but we went as far globally as the Under 2 Coalition, which has local government members on every continent other than Antarctica, which as far as I know has no local governments. Between 2005 and 2018, the county population increased by 13%, and our greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 19%. So we're really doing pretty well for those goals we set in 2008. Unfortunately, we realized that those goals were really not nearly ambitious enough. As climate science advanced, we needed much more ambitious new goals. So with the climate emergency declaration, the county declared that it would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2027 and 100% by 2035, and would initiate large-scale efforts to remove excess carbon from the atmosphere. Now, having an ambitious goal is great, but as Greta Thunberg has been pointing out lately, a goal to do something by 2050 doesn't really do much. And 2035 might do a little more, but a goal in itself doesn't create anything. It doesn't take any carbon out of the atmosphere. So we needed a new plan. So the county recruited people to join the Montgomery County Climate Mobilization Work Group in 2009. 10 people from county government, the public schools, and the Park Planning Commission met with representatives from a number of organizations like 315 MoCo, Climate Mobilization, and the Montgomery County Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. They had two primary goals. One was to identify solutions and specific methods to progress toward goals. And another was to make an inventory of existing efforts and measures in county government and agencies. Now, many of you are familiar with Project Drawdown. They used the drawdown solutions as a starting point. And in their report in June of 2008, they identified over 100 high-level measures to consider. Those included policy changes, new programs, and financial incentives. But to make decisions on that, they needed much broader engagement throughout the county than they had in that work group. They also knew they needed more resources and more technical expertise to evaluate these various options. So in July of 2019, they created the technical work groups that had broader representation with community members, county staff, and staff from the various municipalities. They created 5 groups. One focused on buildings, another on clean energy, on transportation, climate adaptation and sequestration, and another on public engagement and education. Those groups were tasked to recommend strategies to meet goals while decreasing racial and health disparities. And they took that recommendation very seriously, of that task. They made 894 recommendations. They also identified data and knowledge gaps that needed more technical analysis. So in April of 2020, the county contracted with a consultant team for the analysis and modeling phase of the Climate Action Plan. Hopefully that's almost done, because now in late 2020, the draft plan is due so we can begin our public comment. In spring of 2021, we'll finalize the Climate Action Plan. Well, that's great, but that's been going on for over 3 years. And that again doesn't take any carbon out of the atmosphere or decrease any emissions. So what has been going on during all that? There have been many initiatives going on. Just to mention a few, the development of 6-megawatt solar array, the opening of the first bus rapid transit line, a green bank that provides clean energy financing for businesses, homeowners, and nonprofits. Tree Montgomery's been busy planting shade trees. The Resilience Ambassadors Program has been empowering young leaders to engage and represent underrepresented voices, and there have been many educational programs. Now, with all this going on, there still are many barriers to success. There's some things the county simply can't control. There also are physical constraints, and there's always opposition to proposed regulations. You know, changing behavior is a really challenging thing. We have to collaborate with the state and with neighboring jurisdictions. COVID-19 has come up with many new challenges, and not all the things that we as climate activists would like to see are going to fit into a climate action plan. For example, getting the county to divest from fossil fuels. Now, there are many opportunities to be involved in all of this. You can stay informed through newsletters, websites, et cetera, because one of the big challenges is just to keep track of all this. There's so much going on. As Jerry mentioned, you can attend meetings virtually. There now are climate planning virtual office hours monthly that are informal opportunities. And soon we'll all have an opportunity to comment on the draft action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Michael, you're up next. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I will be focusing on climate action and justice that we have been engaged in as an organization through coalition-based efforts, including the critical climate emergency declaration that the city of Tucson recently passed in September. At Local First Arizona, I'm the statewide sustainability director, and our mission is to build equitable systems for Arizona's local businesses and communities, and to create a vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable Arizona economy. Our vision is an Arizona economy where local businesses and communities are resilient and are inclusive of all residents. So we focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We focus on local food systems and rural economic development, as well as ensuring that there's sustainability involved in everything that we do so that we are environmentally regenerative and are focused on a regenerative economy. I'll talk about that in a moment. So with environmental sustainability, we believe and we focus on the fact that Local First Arizona can support both economic sustainability and environmental sustainability to go hand in hand so that our communities can be focused on climate action. The major goals that we have with working with our local businesses are, and programmatically, looking at reducing operating costs by saving on utilities, reducing energy, water, waste, and carbon emissions, and focusing on the data collection that goes along with it, educating our businesses, employees, and patrons in our network. We have 3,000 members, over 3,000 members in our network to do that education with and growing, and ensuring that we're preparing for a future with a changing climate and helping these businesses sustain through these COVID-19 times, this crisis that we're in, and attract and retain clients, customers, and employees, and engage those employees. I want to focus now on a recent analysis, a key point here, that compared the stimulus spending in the COVID-19 crisis and the fact that the US has spent the most stimulus money compared to other major economies, however, the least amount on green energy. And according to the International Energy Agency and other experts, they've made the case that building back better, if done right, can definitely create new jobs and begin to address longstanding environmental injustices. So three areas or three examples of what we do project-wise, program-wise, to lead to climate action efforts and outcomes, and where green investments can be concentrated are models like this. One is our Green Leaders Program. It's a certification program that provides local and non-local businesses through partnerships with others in our coalition with an entry point to learn about, evaluate, and adopt cost-saving sustainability practices through a 65-point checklist. Upon completion, businesses receive an individualized virtual consultation, personalized recommendations, marketing promotion, and recognition for their leadership. We also focus on resiliency strategies and focusing on the social impact. And then those graduates receive a higher level of certification for additional benefits as they keep moving forward. Our more advanced program is Scale Up. It's a comprehensive 7-week workshop series on sustainability project planning. And what we do is we've created a platform so that the businesses can go from sustainability education and collaboration in a cohort to project planning, financing, and implementation all in one accessible package. It's been done completely virtual in these times now, and we include resources such as Project Drawdown. The participants then have access to low interest loans to finance these projects through an exclusive Green Community Fund in partnership with the local Community Investment Corporation. And then other exclusive benefits are available through our partnerships with utilities and municipalities and other organizations to connect those plans to community benefits. So the more community impact that the project has and the more data gathered for a minimum of a 20% reduction in energy, water, and transportation and waste usage and carbon emissions, we then provide more benefits to those projects that enhance climate action and resiliency. One other example is the Tucson 2030 district that we partner with. It's a national effort. It's a North American network of 22 cities whose vision is to establish high performance building districts and to focus on a big goal. The goal is to pledge to participate in a 50% reduction in energy, water, and transportation related emissions by 2030 through that district effort. It's a private-public partnership effort, and it's collaboration based. It's focused on resources and financing. And now there's a program available to help the businesses that go through our programs go to the next level up and pledge to that 50% reduction goal set. I also want to highlight a few localism policies that we're focused on as being holistic with the work that we do. That access to capital piece is critical for the work that we do with Scale Up and our programs. And generally, it's crippling small businesses to not have that access. And it's been in the news a lot lately. And the why is there's too much in the big banks. We need to focus on shifting our money to local banks and credit unions. That's a big part of the work we do with advocacy at Local First Arizona. We also focus on local food systems and food access and farmland conservation. And worker cooperatives are a strategy that we want to spend a lot more time on and encourage the businesses going through our programs to consider with the social impact planning to support a resilient and sustainable local economy. And two more points I want to make. A regenerative economy to us is based on the definition from the Climate Justice Alliance, which states that a regenerative economy is based on ecological restoration, community protection, equitable partnerships, justice, and full and fair participatory processes. And ultimately, with Scale Up in all of our sustainability programming and projects, we focus on resiliency planning and a regenerative economy so that our small to medium-sized businesses can reimagine themselves in a fluctuating economy in this crisis and beyond, so they can survive and thrive post-COVID and engage and support the community while leading climate action. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Our next speaker is Myra. Myra, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm enjoying these presentations, I have to say, and it's a nice setup, each and every one of them, for an area I want to focus on that I call activating civic spaces. My work from the global really takes life and becomes active when I bring it to local spaces. And when you hear local, I want you to hear community. I want you to hear generations, that cross-section of families of every age, of every composition, all people. It's an all hands on deck moment that we're in. And one of the things that I see in front of us really comes from my work with Stockholm Resilience Center, where the scientists around the world looked at the planet in terms of its vital signs. And I like that way of looking at our Earth because it lives. And I'm a person who, as a young person, saw Earth for the first time from space, and it changed my life. And one of the ways that I was able to dive in and feed my own curiosity and learn how to walk on the planet was through civic spaces that were available to me. And actually, those civic spaces that were available to me weren't always available. And I'm always aware of that. And I think that's why I value them so much. So what is a civic space? It's a place that we have in our communities that are an infrastructure, that are important to democratic life, where politically and socially we can gather and we can learn from each other, and we can share and exchange information. It's an important component of knowing one another, knowing your neighbors, and learning how to work on projects together. And these civic spaces today, even during COVID, civic spaces like museums, libraries, and for me, I include farmers markets, are disaster resilience centers. And in our conversation around climate, social justice, environmental change and mitigation and adaptation, those areas in our community, those spaces where we can gather, inform each other, are critical for making the changes that need to be made in the next generation. because all the scientists at the end of the day agreed that the major shift that needed to occur was in the social dimension, our behavior, and how we saw our planet and the systems that we use to govern. And that's real for me. I think Mike was alluding to that. Jerry was alluding to the power of what we do locally. It impacts the way we're living and the decisions that we're making. These civic spaces need to be funded, need to be expanded, and need our attention. But most of all, those that are there are available for us to share the messages of climate, of food system, food systems, all these areas involving equity. These are those places that can host our conversations. And we need those to be actively used from election to election. And these stories that we have to tell of living during these times are also important to pass down through the ranks. Most of all, I believe that when we engage young people in these activities, we really do begin to make a change toward generational outcomes that we can realize. And believe you me, the state of our challenges do require that we see significant change in a generation. I want to speak to farmers markets because I know that Francis mentioned the work of drawdown. If you go through the top 20 list in that conversation, you will see that most of what is being called for is around food and soil health, the inclusion of women in the work. And farmers markets, if you're visiting a farmers market, isn't that the happiest place you can be on a Saturday or whatever day of the week? These are areas that are ripe and available for engaging young people in citizen scientist activities, or caring for the waters and rivers in the community, and learning about lifestyle changes that we all need to be cognizant of and aware of. And so to find those entry points where we can have the conversations on climate action without literally talking about climate change and science excessively, meeting people where they are as part of, I think, the creative opportunity of the moment. And so I have a lot of love for these spaces throughout my lifetime. They have been the places where I've learned about other cultures, experienced the stories of people that I live, that I otherwise would not, and that I could take deep dives in learning those systems. And I see this as a reactivation of the Lyceum system that was really popular in the 19th century in America, and that was also utilized in the colonies. It is about secondary education and the places that we open up to learn a new way to live in harmony with nature. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Myra. Joe, you are next up.
Mark, it almost looks like Joe might have froze up. Yes,
Oh.
Joe did freeze up. So we'll go to the next person and hopefully Joe will come back to us.
Okay, Marilyn, if you can hear me and you're available to go, could you take it away, please?
Okay, thank you. And I hope Joe comes back. This has
Me
been
too.
very interesting. And it's so nice to see so many active people doing things. And thank you for asking me to present. You know, it's interesting because the day I accepted the invitation, I read an article in Sierra Magazine titled, "All Politics is Still Local." And I want to start with a quote from that article. "Local organizing has always played a far greater role than the history books let on. If you know your local government and your neighbors, you can change the world from the bottom up." And from a New York Times recent email, a vote in a local municipal election could have a lot more impact in your everyday life than a federal vote. Those are the folks that are going to make an impact on your home and where you live. And I think we've been hearing some of these things in the previous presentations. Personally, I'm relatively new at working locally on environmental issues. For 28 years, I directed a national nonprofit I founded called Trips for Kids to introduce inner city youth to nature through mountain bike rides. When I retired at the end of 2015, I decided to spend all my time working directly on environmental issues, as I have been concerned about our environment since my college days 60 years ago. And I think I hear some of the same things coming from Jerry in some of our different webinars. So far, my experience with local issues was helping to pass a 100% community choice electricity project in our county's 11 cities. And currently, I'm working on a single-use foodware ordinance and a climate emergency resolution for all of our cities. I'm going to talk about the 10 things I've learned regarding influencing local climate policy. 1, figure out what issues should be a priority in your community. This may take some research, but can be done mostly by talking to local environmental activists. Does this issue interest you? Number 2, it is most important that you feel passionate about the issue you choose so that you're motivated to work on it. 3, network to form a team. Understand the issue so that you can reach out for help from others. Start with your own contacts, and as people jump in, if more help is needed, ask them to contact people they know. 4, find team members to take on tasks. You'll want people skilled in speaking, writing, PR, research, and administration. 5, work hard. It's always good to work smart, but working hard is equally important. Things don't just happen by learning about them. We have to dig in and spend time taking each step that leads toward our goal. For 9 years in the early 80s, I worked for Huey Johnson, who started Trust for Public Land and was our Secretary of Resources under Governor Brown's first administration. I'll never forget that Huey would say to us that hard work and perseverance were absolute necessities. And he would point to a California logging measure that took them 20 years to pass, but they never gave up. 6, attention to detail and always follow up. I've always been a very detailed person, but working with Trips for Kids for 28 years made me realize that ideas are cheap and execution is everything. I write everything down, keep a calendar, keep a to-do list, maintain detailed records, and follow through on everything, and always get back to everyone right away. 7, meet with your local representatives. The 3 environmental issues I worked on all needed our city council to vote on them. We began reaching out individually to each council member to share our project and find out their level of support. In one of the projects I'm currently working on, we invited our council members to attend Zoom meetings with our committee so we could hear from them and they could hear from us. 8, get community support. In most cases, to secure the vote of the council, you will need to reach out to your community to show their support by sending emails and letters and attending council meetings when the issue is discussed. At times, you might even want to hold a public rally on the issue, and of course, you'll need people to attend that. 9, raise funds if needed. You may need to raise funds to support the expenses of the group. One of our members invited his friends to contribute to the issue in honor of his birthday and was able to raise $500. 10, get press. Develop contacts with your local press so that you could invite them to cover the issue. Without a doubt, obtaining press helps to develop community interest and support. Those are my 10 things I've learned regarding influencing local climate policy, but I imagine you can think of many more that could be added to the list. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Marilyn. Joe, are you able to jump in now?
Yes, yes, I am. Okay. I apologize to my colleagues. For whatever reason, I've been unstable, not me.
Thank you.
I want to share a little bit of information about a very specific project related to food waste, which Myra referred to. I considered myself to be a good environmental citizen, although I was never involved in any collective climate efforts until I retired in the fall of 2016. And by the end of 2017, I had hooked up with somebody who in the area already was involved in ECA, and we created the Ann Arbor Area Elders Climate Action Chapter. Our first task really was to make friends with other like-minded groups. And so we began to identify and cooperate and collaborate with other local groups interested in climate issues. One of those groups happened to be the Climate Change and Earth Care Task Force associated with the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice in this area. And they had been working on food waste issues. And so ECA chapter members and Climate Change Task Force members began to have conversations around food waste. I suspect that most people are familiar, at least generally, with some of these issues, but 20% of the stuff that goes into landfills is food waste. 40% of what we produce is wasted. And estimates are that it costs about $220 billion a year wasted. So Ann Arbor had an existing compost program primarily devoted to spring and fall leaf and garden collections and so on. But in 2014, they had amended that policy to allow putting organic waste, food waste, into the compost carts to be taken to the compost facility. What we discovered in our conversations, in our meetings, and talking with local officials, that not everybody had compost carts. And even if people had compost carts, they didn't know in 2018 that you could put food waste in the compost carts. So we basically drafted a proposal. The city had set aside a pot of money to support creative ideas. We put together a proposal to do an educational informational campaign and to help people get compost carts if they don't have any. We applied to the city for a small pot of money, and we were the first application to be accepted under the city's small grant program, and we were the first to be approved. What we basically did was we identified a particular project area, a trash route, with about 800 or 900 addresses, and we went through that trash route on 4 different Thursdays over 3 months during the summer of 2018. We put flyers and stickers on trash carts and recycle carts, alerting people what could go in the compost cart. We also indicated to them that we would help them get a compost cart if they didn't have any. We engaged 30 volunteers to help us do this, some members of the chapter, some members of the task force, and families, members, and friends were recruited to do some of that work too. We ended up getting 30 additional compost carts out in that trash route area, subsidized by the city grant. As a publicity stunt, we delivered some of those on the back of a bicycle and got pictures in the local media and so on. Obviously, we had a couple of things going for us in terms of this project. Both Jan Wright, the head of the task force, and I were very familiar with writing grant applications because of our academic backgrounds, so that didn't prove to be an obstacle. The city already had a compost ordinance, and they had amended that ordinance several years earlier. So the setting was perfect. And my experience in working with city officials, that was my academic background, they were very, very supportive. The communications director helped us draft the messages which we used in our informational campaign. The administrative services director described how the composting system worked, how the weights were captured and so on. So we had a lot of things going for us. There was this little pot of money that we were able to take advantage of. Only $5,000, but again, we got a lot done with it. So I guess what I was thinking about as I kind of pulled these ideas together, could anybody else do something like this? Are there lessons to be learned? And like Marilyn, I have several lessons that I think might be learned. First of all, you got to be willing to try, to devote the time and energy. It took us an enormous amount of time to map out and to create maps of the neighborhoods so we could direct our volunteers in those efforts. It was obviously better for us to cooperate, the two groups cooperating, because we were able to magnify the efforts of any one of the two groups. You got to build on a topic or issue about which you're passionate, because that becomes a critical motivator when things drag. And I tell you, there was a Thursday morning that was overcast and we were scheduled to do it. We had 21 or 22 people lined up to do it. But you really don't want to do that on an overcast and kind of rainy morning. So you got to be passionate about what you're doing. You got to develop good relationships with local officials or other people who are influential on the topic about which you're working, on which you're working. We were able to tap the city's small pool of funds, but my own experience is if you're looking for a small pot of money, there are lots of sources out there, community foundations, even some of the small businesses around are susceptible to a request. And echoing what others have already said, you really have to become involved in your community. As a result of the work that we did, Jan Wright, my co-director, and I both ended up getting appointed to a city solid waste management planning process. We served on that committee for a year. And I now have been invited to join an advisory body for the county Board of Public Works. And so being visible and not only personally, but being visible as an elders climate action chapter made a big difference for us. Enough.
Thank you, Joe. So one last speaker, and then we'll go to Q&A. And so this is Candice, and I've got to tell her we dropped the ball a little bit with her, and she didn't know she was going to be speaking for a few minutes by herself. So she's improvising, and we appreciate it. Take it away, Candice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to tell you, I'm watching this participant number down here, and if it starts going down, then we might have a little bit of problem. So if it gets to 75, I'm going to stop talking. I'm just kidding. So I am so excited to be joining you all in conversation this evening. And although I am doing a little bit of improvisation here, I want to acknowledge that there is so much talent and so much knowledge just in these, what I see, 10 squares. And I know that each of you who's watching is also learning a lot, but you're also probably hearing a lot of things that you at least are somewhat familiar with. The concepts sound familiar, the priorities sound familiar, the language and the vocabulary sounds familiar. But what I want to talk about is a little bit from my perspective. I've been an elected official now for 9.5 years. And in Hyattsville, Maryland, which is in Prince George's County. I'm a neighbor of Francis. And I'm originally, though, from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm a Southern girl. And my parents are from Mississippi. They have, growing up in a Southern city, I didn't grow up necessarily thinking or learning about the environment intentionally. We learned that the leaves changed colors. We learned that you can recycle certain things, but recycling wasn't something that was, taught in school. It wasn't part of our just everyday life. So everything around environment for me is something that I've learned as an adult. And so I want you to have that kind of as the overarching thing for what I am talking about. So I want to tell you, as an elected official, and as someone who is coming into my own maturation around my understanding and my appreciation.
Candice, we got to freeze up.
The trials and tribulations of digital life here. Maybe we move on to question and answer for a few minutes and then see if she comes back and we can pick back up.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to close out the panel, or do you want me to just do a few Q&A and then we come back and then you close out?
Yeah, until we hear from Candice, I think that if you could just maybe start present, let the panel know about the questions, and then whoever feels comfortable answering can do that.
Okay, so great. So I'm Marianne Krasny, and along with Francis and Mark, I'm co-chair of the Education Committee for ECA. We have 3 co-chairs, and I live in Ithaca, New York, in upstate New York. So our first question comes from Cindy Catt, and she's interested in Clean Energy Jobs Acts. Apparently, there's being one proposed in Illinois, and this is for any panelists. Do you have any, thoughts about Clean Energy Jobs Acts?
It's a little bit more on the state level, but Maryland passed a Clean Energy Jobs Act last year. Now, in each state, it's going to be a little bit different. In Maryland, it focused on setting goals for the percentage of electricity that would be renewable by certain dates, and investing in training for people to make the transition to working in clean energy jobs, particularly in solar and wind. We're still early into this, but so far it looks very, very positive, and I hope Illinois will be able to do the same.
Francis, I'm going to take the liberty of doing a little follow-up. How, and because, this might, in some of the conservative states, like West Virginia, nearby to where you are, I guess Illinois less so, but do you have any idea how people react to these idea of clean energy jobs acts? Is there a lot of resistance because it's,
Candice is back, so why don't we hold off on that?
Okay, go Candice.
I am so sorry. I swear, if one thing happens, I'm gonna say it was Joe. I'm kidding.
There was a cliffhanger there at maturation.
Okay, great. So that was when I noticed it went away. But so I just want you to understand for me that the umbrella is that I am speaking from someone who is kind of in an elected official capacity, but I've also matured over time in my understanding and my appreciation for what it means to be an advocate for the environment. And in Hyattsville, for example, when I first got into office in 2011, the contentious issue at that time was whether or not the city would support and financially support being able to put a water line into one of our community parks, and so that the community group could support a community garden.
Cool.
And there were factions about that. And the reason why there are factions, and I believe deeply in the importance in telling the truth and naming something for what it is, what we have to understand as those of us who care about this issue and this topic is that for those who are not embedded in this work, either as an advocate or through their professional career or whatever it might be, climate and environment are largely viewed by many as a white issue, a progressive issue, a liberal issue, and it's moneyed. So it has this kind of sheen of something that, why would I care about? This is inaccessible to me, because the people who care about it, they either don't look like me, they have more resources than I do, or their politics are not like mine. And what we have to remember as advocates is that our job is to, especially when we're talking about something that quite literally changes the world, that we have to get people to understand that climate and environment is about quality of life. It is about everyone. It is about sustainability, and everyone can play a role in that, in what that is. So that means, how can we make this feel or be something that everyone can see, something that they can touch? Because when I tell you, when I first got on council and people started talking about stormwater management, I was like, okay. I get it. I understand the words that you are saying, but why do I care about this? I need you to tell me in words that make sense to me. And so what works, and what I've seen work over time for someone like me, the majority of your elected officials, I will likely say, are people like me. Because politicians, you know, like I said, I'm fine telling the truth. Politicians, we go where the wind blows. If we see there's a group over here, we're going to point our interest to that group over there. And we're going to try to do everything that we can to satisfy these various groups. And what we want to do is make as many of those groups that politicians listen to say similar things. So you want young people saying similar things. You want your seniors saying similar things. You want those who are more focused perhaps on urban development saying the same things. Those who are focused on historic preservation saying the same thing. There should be this undercurrent of climate and environment. And I would also add to that racial equity, right? Because there is that dynamic that I think ultimately is the foundation of everything that we're doing, or should be the foundation of everything that we're doing. And so we went from having contentious discussions around whether or not there should be water that the city supports and going to a community garden, to doing those things that folks have come to expect now from the city of Hyattsville. And our advocates for it are not just your progressive white enclave families. This is almost the entire community that is seeing the benefit of it. And those things are like, we have a food forest in one of our public parks that is in one of the areas of the community that most people forget is actually part of the city. We have composting that started as a pilot program and is now expanded to all households that they want to participate. We have, we focus, when we talk about new development, we talk about public transportation and the access to public transportation. We encourage circulations. We're doing studies to figure out how can we cut trips. We encourage walkability. We now have bike sharing stations. We have public charging stations that are free for anyone to use. We have big belly trash receptacles that are solar powered, and eventually we might get some that have Wi-Fi. We have pedestrian lighting for school children to walk around some of the busy streets that don't have traffic signals. They have the caution lights that blink, and they're solar powered. We have outdoor classrooms, or spaces that have become outdoor classrooms that are actually rain gardens and bioretention areas. All of those things are things that everyone can see and feel, and they've come to believe that that is what their community is supposed to be like. But in actuality, what they're contributing to is this larger vision of community sustainability. And when we talk about community sustainability, we know that the genesis or the origins of it are in the concepts of how do we make sure that our community as part of this planet continues to thrive. But it also means, how does this community still maintain itself as a community? It's what Myra was talking about. It's about making sure that the community keeps its appeal by having things that everyone loves and appreciates. So every 3 years, we do what's called a community sustainability planning. And that we solicit input from all parts of the community about the things that matter to them. And we have this overarching plan, the general sustainability plan that was drafted by our environment committee many, many years ago, is now the foundation of that. So whenever we're talking about what do our parks look like, or we're talking about what does this area of the city look like, what underscores it is, how do we do this in a way that's sustainable? If we're building new facilities, how do we do this in a way that, okay, it might not be LEED certified, but is built to LEED standards? Those are now things that are part of our mission and our vision for the community. The last thing I will say, that when you're working as an advocate with your local officials, I would also recommend thinking about it in two ways. There's policy, and then there's also programs and services. Programs and services are the things that, to be quite honest, will geek any politician out. We'll be like, oh, we can be there. We can, we can see what it looks like. We can do it right away. It has a reward that's somewhat immediate. I mean, it still takes time to get, go through appropriations processes to get the money allocated to do the program. But at the end of the day, you have a program, and governments love pilots. So the easiest thing to do is to say, hey, I have an idea for a pilot project. And you get one or two champions on the council to do a pilot project. It is more likely that your pilot project will become something that is actually a long-term project, a long-standing project. Why? Because it has cultivated community spirit and brought in goodwill of those around who are using it. Policies, on the other hand, the downside of programs and services is that they are highly susceptible to changes in administration. So if you have a new mayor or a new city council or a new city administrator, depending on your form of government, when they have the pressure of balancing a budget, those things that are not kind of embedded in policy as a requirement to do, they can sometimes end up being the first things on the chopping block. And that's when it's important to pull on some of those threads that, sorry, I can't see everyone on the screen, so I can't call your name right away, but you were saying to encourage everyone to, get media attention, to get folks to email their representatives. That's where that comes in handy. Policy, on the other side, on the other hand, is intellectually satisfying, but it often, and it's long-term because it is, it is formal, but it often has a much longer time before you get to see a reward. So it's important as you're building your community of advocates that you have people who can focus on both. You can have those easy wins, those early rewards, while also creating policy that actually supports those programs so that they can be something that becomes a part of the city and can withstand changes in administration over time. I know I've probably gone over my time, especially when you count in my my technical difficulties, but I really hope that that was somewhat helpful at least. And I'm always happy to answer any questions a little bit later. And I'm going to switch to the other side now through my computer because I think the Wi-Fi is back up here.
Okay, well, thanks, Candice. It was fantastic. Marianne, do we want to return to the Q&A?
Could you want to wrap up the panel, announce the survey? Jen can put the survey link in the chat if she hasn't already, and then we can go to the Q&A.
Sure. You should have a survey. We like to get feedback. We want to see what you think about this. We're also, of course, always interested in new things. As we speak, we are planning for next year, the kinds of content you want to see. And that really can help inform us and make sure that we're responsive to the things you want to see. So if you could take time to fill out that survey before we wrap up today, that'd be really helpful.
Okay. So thanks, Mark, and thanks to each of you. That was really fantastic. It was a really fun format. Everybody had something different and something really important and inspirational to share. So I don't know how Jerry, our fearless leader, feels about this format. Maybe you've done it a million times before, but this is my first time, and I'm really psyched by everything that you all shared. And yeah, so we'll go to the Q&A, and I'll reiterate, if the survey is really to determine if you're interested in following up. And so there's a bunch of little areas that you can check off, like climate emergency. There's also another category that you can check off and you can fill in. So if you're interested in following up with more events, ECA events around policy, then yeah, take the survey. I don't know, Jerry, do you have to be old to take the survey, or can some of no, anybody can fill out the survey, even our panel members. Okay, all right, so I think we answered Cindy's question. So I'm gonna go on to Kathy Moran from Indiana, and this is for Ms. or Dr. Stewart. What kinds of folks were involved for the beginning of your sustainability group, and who needs to be tapped?
If you look at it over time, you see the group widening. The first working group was just county employees, but they worked with representatives from a lot of environmental groups and from faith-based groups concerned about the environment, the Montgomery County Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. And then the technical working groups had a lot more people, although they tended to have a lot of technical experts, which really met their mission. But there is the question of how do you involve people who don't see themselves as technical experts? And I think the Resilience Ambassadors program is part of that, and hopefully in the whole public comment process for the draft plan, we'll see more bringing in people who I think is, as Candice was referring to, don't think of themselves as environmentalists, but whose lives are very much impacted by what's going on with the environment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Frances. And Mike, you probably see up there that we got several questions from you, so I'm just going to put them all together. People wanted to know what you have on your website. I think they can kind of, maybe you can just put the website in the chat if it's not already there, but you know, so many great ideas. Could you elaborate on the methods you used to develop them? How many businesses in Tucson have been involved in a program that is collaboratively reducing emissions by 50%? And a question about circular economy. And I'll just add a little thing I was wondering about, given now the elections are sort of over. Well, I don't want to get political or anything here, but you know, I'm kind of interested in your view on the sort of relative balance between businesses. You know, should we be working with businesses? Should we be working with local government? You know, what are the possibilities there?
Thanks. Well, a lot there. And I'll start with the methods of how we're going about it. And it's been a mix of looking at the data, gathering data through benchmarking and ensuring that we have, for example, usage information to know what our baseline is that we're working with and how we're going to get to that 20% minimum reduction or 50% overall goal for the Tucson 2030 district that I mentioned. And really what I want to name is it's about strength in numbers. I don't think we could get to any of that if it was just businesses or if it was just nonprofits. It's really municipalities, it's utilities, it's community organizations like Physicians for Social Responsibility and many others that are engaged in our growing efforts with the district. And then we've recently started a Southern Arizona Green Business Alliance. And increasingly with that, we want that to be about not just the usual sustainability strategies, but engaging in diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And to Candice's point around racial equity, we've got to think about who's not represented more and understand that historically, it has not been a very diverse movement. Sustainability has been very white, and we need to understand that there's a lot of factors in there in terms of who's been involved, but how accessible is the work? Are we really engaging who's disproportionately impacted by the air quality issues, by COVID-19 now? On top of it all, are we really looking at the opportunities for engaging new groups? I'm encouraged by the youth-based efforts going on to talk about both climate justice and climate action in alignment. And thinking about the circular economy as well. Like, really what we need to be doing is looking at it holistically all around, which takes multiple groups. And that's why we're coalition based in what we're doing. And so you can learn more about that on our website. And because we have hundreds of businesses engaged already, that's been encouraging as we keep signing them up through our projects and our programs. But for us, it's more about how do we team up so we can have more organizations engaged, and we're going to be the group that can do all of this, and we don't want to be. We want to bring expertise in from around the community so we can prioritize by need and also ensure that we have new representation so we can build a movement that will have a bigger impact and help those most in need.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, so John, I'm not sure, John Sadowski, this question might be for Candice or anybody else who's very knowledgeable about policy. So the issue is about natural gas, and you know, a lot of people, there's a big debate about that. Should we be building more? We are building more. And that might slow the transition to renewables. So do you think that new power generation station construction can be challenged at the local level, or is this a state regulation issue? like Candice is going between phone and computer.
And take a stab at that. Utilities are generally regulated at the state level by a Public Service Commission and Public Utilities Commission, you know, something like that. And there's a federal aspect. That doesn't mean that local actions can't be important with that. One thing that we're working on with Maryland that COVID-19 delayed because of our legislative session was cut very short and none of the climate bills were able to be voted on is community choice aggregation, so that we'll have communities being able to really help their citizens who want to get renewable energy do that more easily and more cheaply. And Montgomery County was really pushing for that. So that's something that municipalities and counties can do. There are other things that municipalities and counties can do to push in that direction, even though at that level, they're not the regulators.
Marianne, I should probably speak to this because this is my old area. You know, as an engineer, I actually worked in utilities, designing power plants and building systems just to distribution. My primary field was cogeneration. And you can and should work locally. One of the things that were written in the playbook at utilities in California, because I came out of San Diego Gas and Electric, that really put all of this on the map is if you wanted to put a power plant or a substation of any kind in build it, you looked for a Black community, minority community, a community that was predominantly Catholic. And you probably are wondering, well, why? Because the first process is local when you're siting that substation or power plant. And you have to go through a public hearing process. And if no one shows up to the hearing, guess what? It's in your neighborhood. And this is why, in actuality, when the civil rights movement was moving on, there was a strong Black awareness around environmental issues. But that's why the EPA came along, because there were young people of every stripe working on civil rights. And that got divided because once the EPA was created, there were all those jobs and all that discipline that opened up in the institutions of higher learning that divided a group that saw those things connected. And to this day and always, the co-violations on human rights are always show up where there is degradation to the planet, where there is ecocide. We always see genocide. So they are never disconnected. And most of those co-violations are done by governments. So I just want to really speak very plainly about that. Do not hesitate to act locally. The PUC regulates rates, regulates many aspects of utility life, but a siting of a substation or even a nuclear plant, whatever it may be, is a local issue.
Thanks, Myra. Thanks, Myra. Candice, did you want to add anything or anybody else?
No, I think that was incredibly important. And that if there's anything more salient, I don't know what is.
Okay.
I could add something because here in Marin and other places in California, and I'm sure many of you know of this too, we've got like this electrification squad, and this will be things we'll introduce locally to get to when new buildings are built. I think Berkeley just passed one that you make sure that it's all electric in the new building. And then there are things like reach codes that they can be handled locally. So we've got a big push here and we're doing that.
Okay. Thank you. So Leslie has a couple of questions and they're pretty broad. So there are things about what keeps you going, what keeps you inspired, and how do you decide where to focus your energies, whether it's members of Congress or all the way down to change in personal behaviors, which we really haven't talked about this time. Hey, Joe, you haven't been answering too many questions, so you're still with us. Are you going to unmute yourself? And Jerry, you've been kind of quiet too. I see you smiling up there.
Well, it's an interesting question. Again, from my perspective, when I first got involved in ECA, I thought they focused on the national level, but that's not where my expertise lay. So I started focusing on local governments because that's what I had taught for all those years. And I had local government officials who had been my students spread all across the state. So for me, and I think it was Jerry that essentially made this point, and then Candice just emphasized it. What happens at the local level impacts the quality of your life much more than what happens at the state level or the federal level. And I feel very strongly about that. And I also agree that local officials are actually much more connected to the community. It's much easier to sit down at the restaurant that my city council member owns, sit down with him and talk about a particular issue on the agenda. You can't really do that with your member of Congress, although Congressman Dingell often is in our community. And you can do that to some extent with state officials, but local officials are very accessible, and it's much, much easier to communicate with them, to advocate on the issues that are important to you.
Jerry, did you want to, thanks, Joe. Did you want to add anything, Jerry?
Sure. Joe, you're absolutely right. And elected officials want to sit down and talk to you locally because they need to hear from their constituents, and they need to know that, as Candice was talking about, the different constituent groups, they need to be able to hear that. In terms of what should you do, I think you follow your passion, and know that it is really important to work locally. It's also important on a state and federal level. But some people really, it's a disconnect, as Joe said, and there's an inaccessibility of particularly federal officials and oftentimes state. Oftentimes, I lived in Florida. I was hundreds of miles away from my state officials. So there is that lack of continuity. So I think that, you follow if you're really into federal policy, go for it. But be aware that locally, and I don't think anybody can even say enough to say that what happens locally is really what happens in it's really influences your daily life and the quality of life of your community and the quality of life that your community is going to have for the future. So, and officials want to hear from you. They may not agree, but they still need to hear. So thank you.
Okay.
So, I'd also like to add briefly to that pilot projects and programs can be really effective, like it was mentioned by Candice. And I think it's important that we also consider bringing in resources beyond local to then be applied locally. So we're, for example, part of a local national network of local business coalitions as Local First Arizona. And there are many organizations we partner with or we are influenced by with their research, like the Democracy Collaborative, very like-minded in the values and goals, and Institute for Local Self-Reliance and Project Equity and many others out there. There's so many to name, Climate Justice Alliance. So yeah, I think in bringing that kind of information in of case studies, best practices, data for scale up, the EPA has been a partner, and we've been able to bring their resources to be tailored to the program. So I think federal to state to local, it's important to consider how all that can get linked to local to have a bigger impact locally.
May I add one thing?
Sure.
I would also recommend working with your local colleges and universities as well. And we often think about working with professors. I would say definitely have a professor contact, but many of them have seminars or small classroom groups that do kind of capstone projects or other large projects, and they're always looking for test cases. They're always looking for ways to explore a theory or even to solve a problem that local communities are having. So I would say definitely use those to the degree that you can, because sometimes you can perhaps offer a competition that would, or design a competition that allows young people, young scholars to be able to think about and really grapple with the solution and provide something that you can actually act on in many cases.
Thank you. All right, well, I think we just have time for, was somebody gonna check?
Well, I was just going to add one more thing. I mean, it's so important that we all are active, all of us. And if this is like scary for anybody who's listening, that they've never done this before, I would recommend that you kind of like, there may be someone else in your community that is doing it. Jump in. You will learn by watching what they're doing that you can do the same. But it's always scary to take that first step, but one step leads to the next step.
Thanks, Marilyn. Joe, I don't know if you saw, but there was a bunch of questions about specifics about your project. I don't know if you have any reports or anything that maybe Jen could post on a Google Doc or whatever so that we could share, because we don't have time to go in. We have about 1 more minute for questions, so I don't think we have time to go into details about composting, but but if there are any reports, I think people would really appreciate learning more about the specifics of what you did, how you went about it.
Sure, and I can do that. I can send that. We had to file a report with the city because of the grant connection, and I can share that report with.
That'd be great. I'd be super interested too. So I want to just ask one last big question. It's from Martha Kane, and she asked Candice, although, and we might just have time for one answer because I think Mark has a few closing comments, but do you think the language and the vision of the Green New Deal, that we can use it to move legislation forward, or has it been too tainted by those who fear what it stands for?
Whether it's too tainted or not, we're here. And, it definitely has certain connotations, because when you think about even the origins of the New Deal itself, had certain implications with it as well. But reality is it contains a number of provisions that just simply improve the quality of life for folks, and also provides opportunities and pathways for us to create employment and economic prosperity for communities that have often borne the brunt of environmental damage, and also being left out of the economy that has been produced. And so I think the more that we can, as advocates, hone in on the specifics and talk about how it improves lives, most people do not disagree. They disagree when they start to think about, well, who proposed it? Whose thing is this? Does it have this name? Even when you talk about, hope to not be controversial here, but when people say defund police, when you say we should be investing in community resources, most people agree with that. So it is really, at a certain point, you can't really wade through the language. You're just going to have to continue to nail in and do what advocates do best, and that is stick to what the issues are and make sure that people understand what's important and why it's important. And then I think we can move forward from there.
Okay, thanks so much, Candice. Those were really great insights. Really appreciate it. Mark, do we have time for anybody else to take a shot at that question, or do we need to close it out here?
We are running short on time. We have a few minutes left.
Okay, and so you're going to close it out, or?
Sure. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody, audience, and especially our panel members for your participation. I think this has been fantastic. It's the first time we've tried something like this, and all in all, I think it actually went off really well. We hope you're better informed about the myriad actions you can take to influence local climate change policies. And we have our next events December 15th, if you're able to join us. And again, that relates to state policy. But until then, I hope everybody has a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And again, hopefully we'll see you December 15th. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark. And Jen, did you want to say anything about posting the chat, people wanting to see the chat, or repeat about posting the webinar?
I will be sending out a recording of the webinar tomorrow to everybody who registered. So you should receive a link, and it will also get posted onto our website and our YouTube channel tomorrow as well. I will make sure that I include a link to a document that includes all the chat box, so that if you were trying to follow or capture things out of the chat box, you'll have that. And then if anybody has notes, if any of the panelists have notes that you wouldn't mind sharing or bullet points that you wouldn't mind sharing, I can also include those in tomorrow's bulletin as well. So everybody that's on this call, everybody, all of the participants, watch your email inbox for the bulletin that goes out tomorrow.
And will you send the link to the little survey also, so that if we can sort of see if people cluster in terms of their interest, we might have some follow-up activities.
Yes, I will make sure that I include that link tomorrow as well.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much. This was really, really fun. And I really learned a lot. And it was wonderful to meet all of you. So yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Have a nice
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.